We rarely stop to think about the incredible journey our everyday medications take just to reach us.
It's quite something, isn't it? A huge global network.
Exactly. And it's a network that's seeing some pretty significant shifts right now, shifts that are, well, about to become much more tangible for everyone.
Mhm.
So today, we're diving deep into a cognitive market research report. It really dissects these upcoming 2025 U.S. tariffs and, the ripple effects across the pharmaceutical supply chain.
Precisely. And this report gives us a really detailed look at the specific tariffs, which parts of the industry are going to feel the pinch most, and the strategies companies are basically being forced to consider now.
Right. So our mission here in this deep dive is to pull out those key insights and really understand what these changes could ultimately mean for you, the listener.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. This report lays out some really significant tariffs coming up in 2025. Can you give us a clearer picture of this new tariff landscape? What are the main areas?
Absolutely. The report zeroes in on three main areas. First up, there's a 20 to 25% tariff on active pharmaceutical ingredients APIs and also key drug intermediates.
Okay, APIs, those are the core active parts of the drug.
That's right, the essential stuff that makes the medicine work. These are coming mainly from China and India. Specifically, it's 25% on China, 20% on India.
And these affect a lot of common drugs.
Oh, yes. They're the building blocks for a huge range. Generics, branded drugs. Think antibiotics, antivirals, even oncology treatments, pain management. The report is clear. The immediate effect is inflation. Production costs go up.
That makes sense. If the basic ingredients cost more, well, the final price likely follows. What's the second area?
Second is a 15% tariff on medical packaging. Things like sterile materials, glass vials, and also some lab equipment.
Where does that usually come from?
Often Germany, China, Japan. And the interesting thing here is the potential impact on sort of drug release and stability,
Mhm.
especially complex biologics. They need very specific packages.
Right, stability is key for those.
Mm.
And the third area?
Third is a 25% tariff on pharmaceutical machinery. This is the big equipment like tablet compression machines, fluid bed dryers, lyophilization systems, stuff needed to scale up production.
For things like insulin and vaccines.
Exactly. Insulin, vaccines, biosimilars. And this machinery often comes from places like Switzerland, Germany, and India. So it's not just the ingredients, it's the tools too.
Wow, okay. So it's hitting multiple points in the chain. The report then breaks down the impact by sector. Which part of the industry gets hit hardest or most immediately?
The report really points to generic pharmaceuticals as being particularly vulnerable.
Why them specifically?
Well, they tend to operate on really tight profit margins, and they rely very heavily on those APIs and intermediates from India and China that are now facing these higher tariffs.
Up to 25%, you said.
Potentially, yes, up to 25% on some imported components. So major players, think Teva, Mylan, which is now Viatris, Cipla, they're staring down some substantial cost increases.
Which could mean higher prices for us, for standard generics.
It could easily translate to that, yes. A noticeable jump, potentially in the coming year, for your everyday generic meds.
So how are they adapting? Are they just absorbing it? The report mentioned looking elsewhere.
They're definitely looking elsewhere. There's a clear trend of reevaluating supply chains, looking towards alternatives, maybe Eastern Europe, Latin America.
But that's not simple, is it?
Right.
Switching suppliers.
Not at all. The FDA has a really thorough requalification process for any new supplier. It's like getting a whole new factory approved. It takes time. We're talking months.
Months, so that delays things.
Absolutely. It affects production schedules, how quickly they can bring potentially cheaper alternatives online. And this is where market research becomes crucial, benchmarking prices, vetting new vendors.
Got it. Okay, let's shift to another big area, biopharmaceuticals and biologics.
Mhm.
You mentioned their supply chains are intricate. How are the tariffs affecting them?
They're definitely complex. You're dealing with cell cultures, bioreactors, really sensitive raw materials. The report flags a 20% tariff on key inputs like bioproduction media, viral vectors for gene therapies, sterile filtration units.
Essential components.
Absolutely essential. So it's adding pressure to their costs, no doubt. One key strategy emerging is actively looking into moving parts of their operations.
Moving. Where to?
To countries without these specific tariffs. South Korea and Ireland come up, especially for manufacturing drugs still in clinical trials.
And market research helps decide that.
Vitally. Mapping global bioproduction capacity, doing really detailed cost-benefit analyses of offshoring versus staying put, it's essential homework.
Makes sense. Then there are vaccines and injectables.
Yeah.
Critical, obviously. The report suggests they're facing challenges too.
They really are. They depend on extremely high purity materials, complex cold chain logistics, sterile packaging. It makes them quite susceptible.
So costs are going up there as well.
The report details expected increases in production and distribution costs, possibly in the 12 to 18% range for some. That's driven by tariffs on things like pre-filled syringes, glass ampoules, those special cold chain boxes often sourced from China and Europe.
And what's the response there? Moving production?
Interestingly, yes, but more towards reshoring or nearshoring. Major players like Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson are investing in facilities back in the U.S. or nearby, like Mexico.
Trying to bring it closer to home.
Exactly. And again, market intelligence is key, helping them find alternative thermal packaging, optimize supply contracts, things like that.
Okay, let's talk about CMOs, contract manufacturing organizations. They're kind of the behind-the-scenes factories, right?
That's a good way to put it. Factories for hire, many pharma companies outsource production to them.
How are these tariffs affecting their business? It must be complex.
It definitely adds complexity. Their clients, the drug companies, are rethinking sourcing, so CMOs have to be agile. They're under pressure to co-develop contingency plans, find tariff-free API sources, maybe evaluate dual sourcing for key materials.
So they need backups for their backups.
Pretty much. And US-based CMOs, they're feeling the heat to maybe absorb some rising costs to keep clients happy.
Tough spot. How does market research help them?
It helps them stress test their global operations, identify vulnerabilities, and also look for opportunities, maybe joint ventures in low tariff areas like Singapore, Costa Rica, or the UAE.
Even clinical trials, the very start of the drug journey, are feeling this.
That's right. Think about shipping investigational drugs, kits, devices internationally. That's now facing new duties, more scrutiny. The report mentions potential tariffs up to 25% on some products coming from India and China.
Adding cost and time to research.
Exactly. It adds to the already high costs and long timelines. So the industry is adapting, looking at decentralized trials, more remote participation, and maybe repurposing regional hubs in places like Canada, Belgium, Singapore.
And market research helps navigate that maze too.
Crucial for reoptimizing those complex supply chains, understanding all these specific import-export rules country by country.
It really sounds like market research has shifted. It's not just analysis after the fact anymore, is it?
Not at all. The report really emphasizes this. It's moved from being a post-facto tool to a core strategic component.
Guiding decisions before they happen.
Precisely. Decisions about sourcing, investment, navigating regulations, even competitive strategy. Data-led insights help evaluate alternative hubs, run pricing models, assess supplier reliability, identify policy blind spots.
So it's both cost mitigation and like a strategic compass.
That's a perfect way to put it. In this uncertain environment, it's absolutely both. It's proactive guidance through this turbulent trade landscape.
The report then goes deeper into the U.S. reliance on China specifically. It sounds like it's more than just the direct import numbers tell us.
Oh, much deeper. The direct imports from China in 2023 were around $6 billion, sure, out of maybe $176 billion total pharma imports, but that's misleading.
How so?
The report highlights that nearly 70% of all the APIs used in U.S. generic drugs either come directly from China or are made using intermediate chemicals that originated in China.
Wow. So even if the final API wasn't made in China, the ingredients to make it were.
Exactly. That's the crucial point. And then there's the indirect reliance. We rely on places like India, right? But India itself gets over 70% of its API supply from China.
So a drug labeled made in India could still fundamentally depend on China.
Very likely, yes. So this web of dependencies means tariffs targeting China or any disruption there can cause really widespread bottlenecks affecting drug availability and pricing right here. It's a hidden vulnerability almost.
It really paints a picture of a system that's much more interconnected and maybe fragile than most of us realize. So how does this specifically hit the companies making our drugs?
The report zooms in on those generic and over-the-counter drug makers again. Thin margins, remember. They are just incredibly sensitive to input cost surges.
And we're seeing those surges now.
Yes. The report mentions companies reporting API cost hikes between 12 and 20% for common drugs. Things like amoxicillin, acetaminophen, metformin.
Everyday medications.
Absolutely. And those higher costs, they almost inevitably get passed down the chain. Wholesalers, pharmacies, and ultimately, they impact the price you pay.
And the alternatives aren't easy.
Well, the rush to find alternative suppliers, say in India or Hungary, is straining their capacity. We're seeing longer lead times, backlogs developing.
So just switching isn't a simple solution.
Not at all. That whole China plus one strategy, adding another supply country, sounds good, but it's proving complex. Costs, regulatory hurdles in new countries, long approval cycles, it's not straightforward.
And the pandemic really drove home the risks of relying on one place, didn't it?
It absolutely highlighted the risks of single country dependency for essential goods like medicines. A painful lesson.
The report gives some really specific examples of how market research is being used to tackle these challenges. Can you walk us through a few?
Sure. Take API sourcing intelligence. Market research provides really granular data on global manufacturing hubs, not just cost and capacity, but their regulatory track record, quality certifications like GMP, inspection results, even geopolitical stability.
So you can properly vet alternatives.
Exactly. Identify and thoroughly vet alternatives in Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America. Companies use this to build supplier scorecards, run scenarios for dual sourcing, maybe plan strategic warehousing.
And for managing costs.
Market research enables detailed cost modeling right down to the molecule level across different geographies. It factors in raw materials, currency exchange, regulatory overhead, everything.
Allowing companies to adjust pricing or contracts.
Precisely. Recalibrate pricing, adjust project timelines, renegotiate supplier contracts based on the full picture. For instance, an EU supplier might have a higher initial unit cost for an API.
But fewer headaches down the line.
Potentially, yes. Lower compliance burden, less tariff exposure, so the total cost might actually be lower. It's about that total cost view.
That makes a lot of sense. You need the full picture. What other strategic uses are there?
Another big one is product portfolio risk assessment. Using market research, maybe even AI tools, to scan your whole product line and pinpoint which drugs are most vulnerable because of China sourcing.
And then you prioritize those.
You got it. Prioritize them for reformulation, finding different ingredients, or maybe relocating production entirely. It helps focus resources. Then there's regulatory monitoring, essential.
Keeping track of all the rule changes.
Constantly. Import-export rules, tariff codes, FDA guidelines, EMA in Europe, WHO GMP. It's a moving target. Market research tracks this, like monitoring U.S. efforts to boost domestic API production under things like the Defense Production Act. Helps you anticipate.
And finally, demand forecasting.
Yeah, that needs adjusting too. You have to factor in potential tariff-induced shortages or policy shifts. Market research helps map demand trends so companies can adjust production, maybe stockpile certain drugs.
Like antibiotics or pain meds if their APIs are constrained.
Exactly. Or identify gaps, opportunities for new drugs in markets that might become underserved because of these shifts.
So it's a really comprehensive, data-driven way to manage risk at basically every stage.
That's the idea.
The report also mentions specific strategic responses we're seeing from companies. What are the key moves?
We're seeing several clear strategies. A big one is onshoring or nearshoring API production. Major U.S. players, Pfizer, J&J, Viatris, are looking at direct investment or partnerships with CDMOs here, or in Puerto Rico, maybe Eastern Europe.
Bringing production closer.
Yes, and simultaneously, big Indian firms like Sun Pharma and Aurobindo are expanding their domestic API capacity, likely to capture some of that shifting demand.
Interesting. What else?
Lots of investment in digital supply chain tools, things like AI for demand planning, real-time tracking, better quality compliance systems, trying to get more visibility and agility.
Using tech to manage complexity.
Right. Some are also re-engineering formulations, like switching the salt form of a drug if it avoids a tariff-hit intermediate. And finally, more collaboration, industry-wide initiatives, government partnerships like with BARDA to strengthen domestic capabilities.
It really sounds like a fundamental reshaping is underway. The report ends with a pretty stark statistic, doesn't it?
It does. The U.S. FDA reports that over 80%, 80, of the manufacturing sites for APIs used in drugs consumed right here in the U.S. are currently located outside the country.
80%. That really underscores the vulnerability, doesn't it?
It absolutely highlights the sector's exposure as these global trade dynamics keep evolving.
So wrapping this up, these 2025 tariffs, they're clearly more than just numbers on a page. They are fundamentally reshaping the global pharmaceutical supply chain.
No question about it.
We're seeing potential for increased costs across the board, a real risk of shortages for some key medications, and these major strategic shifts in where and how our medicines get made. And for you listening, this could mean While higher prices potentially for prescriptions, maybe occasional difficulties finding certain drugs, but also maybe a deeper appreciation for the incredibly complex global web behind your healthcare.
That sums it up well. And this whole situation, it really brings up a vital question for you to ponder. Given how interconnected drug manufacturing is globally, and with these major trade shifts happening, what level of domestic pharmaceutical production do you think is really necessary? Or desirable, even, for national security, for public health?
It's a complex question.
Definitely no easy answers. We'd really encourage you to keep following the news and research on these critical pharmaceutical supply chains. It affects us all.